Hi guys, my name is Tom. I am dexterous on Heli Freak, and I wanted to make a quick video for you to show you how to get the brand new Microbeast Plus Pro Edition version 4 firmware working with AttitudeControl. I struggled with this a little bit and I wanted to make a video so you guys could do it quickly and easily. So I've got a helicopter here. This is kind of a rolling test bed. It's a Blade 500X. I've got my DX69, I've got a battery, I've got my laptop. I've got a Spectrum brand, but it is identical to the BeastX USB dongle. And very, very importantly, I have the ESC input for this helicopter disconnected, so we will not have any mishaps at all. Now, this machine is already set up and working, so this is going to be a simulation. It is not going to be real. So the very first thing I did is I pulled the BeastX out of the box. I connected it to a BEC that I had laying around. I connected the laptop and this cable up here. I powered, I connected everything up. I opened Studio X and I powered the Microbeast up. Again, it was sitting on a bench, not in a helicopter. It's important that it's not plugged into servos when you're doing this. It could damage the servos. So I got all that connected, I plugged it in, and then I came over here to Studio X. So I am plugged into servos right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you this, because again, I already have all this set up. I'm going to plug it in, but imagine it was on a bench and there was nothing plugged in. Again, that's going to beep because I've got the wire disconnected. And it will show up over here in Studio X. It takes a moment. You'll see that the LED will flash here. Oh, and there it goes. So this would have been running the version 3.2 firmware from the factory. You go to the Update Firmware tab, and it will list several different firmwares. It'll show you the 2.4.0 firmwares available, one with and one without AttitudeControl, plus the older 3.2 firmware. The new firmware is not free. It's 100 euros, actually 99 euros, which is about 110 US dollars. So you put a PayPal account in, it will bill your PayPal account 110 bucks. It then would flash everything over the cable. So there are two manuals. There's the original manual, which you get a printed copy of in that box I showed you. Plus there's a PDF you have to download online. The PDF is the version 4 addendum manual, and that's what this is over here. If you read this manual, it will tell you that whether you're doing a brand new BeastX installation or not, especially if you've got a previously running helicopter, you want to do a factory defaults reset. So in my simulation, I just connected it all on the bench. I flashed my firmware. The firmware flash happened. I followed the instructions. Now the firmware flash is done. So I would disconnect the power, and then you have to disconnect this wire. You can't flash the firmware and then do the factory reset. You actually have to disconnect this in advance. So to do a factory default reset, I'm not going to do this. Again, it's going to be very difficult to hold the phone here. You have to push I take that back. You have to power it up after the firmware update, and we can watch it boot here. We're waiting for the blue status LED. I think it's going to keep beeping because it's got no ESC connection. And then you hold the little black button down until you enter one of the menu options in the setup menu. You would then push and hold for 10 seconds, all the lights will flash, and then the unit's been reset. Now, I always pull the power after that. I always shut it off and power it back up. However, if you're adding the version 4 firmware, especially if you've got a standard receiver, there is another step in here that you've also got to do that was not very clear. So I've got the regular manual here. I've got all of my stuff plugged in here now. Everything is connected. But I looked at this page here to determine how you want to do this. You really should not have anything but the receiver plugged in. Don't plug the servos in yet. Wait for the servos. You could damage them. So while it's sitting on the bench, you want to look at page 14 of the addendum manual, and you'll see this section right here. After updating Microbeast Plus to the Pro Edition firmware, you must perform receiver setup once, independent of which receiver type you use. So what that means is that you have to go to the standard manual, and you have to look at page 29 in the standard manual, and it's got instructions for doing this. Now, there are several spots in the manual where it seems to suggest that you don't have to do this in the 3.0 manual, but you have to do it in the 4.0 manual. This one's right. This one here, just follow along. So what it says to do, I'll paraphrase, is to hold the button down and plug the battery connection in, and you get a special menu called, the receiver, setup menu. First thing that's going to happen if you read this is that LED A up here will start to blink. So I got to prop the phone up here. I can't hold it. It's incredibly difficult to do this with one person. I'm going to set the battery here so I can push this and connect. Immediately, as soon as I plug it in, I get LEDs that look like this right here. So I've got A flashing. Now again, this is what I missed. I didn't look at page 14 until after the fact, until I couldn't get AttitudeControl to work. So here we have A flashing, and it says right here that if I was setting up a Spectrum satellite, which again, that's on this page here, this is 23, if I was doing this, I would pick one of these colored options here. But if I have a standard receiver, what I want is off. Now, to get to these other menus, you push and hold the button up here for 2 seconds. You don't want to do that. That would be a mistake. What you want to do is you want to briefly tap the setup button to save. I've already got it set up because the default is LED off, which means standard receiver. I'm going to tap one time and watch what happens. I get all the LEDs flashing. That means it has saved to standard receiver, and I'm going to pull the power. That's what I missed. So now I can go about all my programming. So I don't really need any of this anymore to continue to demonstrate what we want to do. So I just want to show you the manual. So we went through this page. I'm going to set that aside. And by the way, this cable can't be plugged in when you're doing any of this right here. It has to be off. So now that you've got the firmware up to date, the factory defaults reset completed, and the receiver setup, whether it be a standard receiver or a satellite of some type, you want to make sure you get all your connections. Here's an example of what I did. I got all these guys connected. I've got a standard receiver down here. It's a Spectrum AR 6210, and I've got the companion satellite here. All those wires are through here. They come right out of here and plug in, just like any normal Beast X. No difference of any kind. Again, I'm looking at the old manual, by the way. They direct you to this. If it was a satellite for a smaller aircraft, you plug that in. Same kind of thing. Of course, you would have picked a different option here. And by the way, on page 30 of the standard manual, they run you through the menu options to how to do a satellite setup. This does not show, or there's not an example anywhere in here that shows how to do a standard receiver setup. That's why I wanted to show you how to do it right there. So now that we've got the receiver setup done, now we can go on to a standard Beast X setup. But this is a version 4 setup. It's a little bit different. Anybody who's ever used a Beast X should recognize this chart. It's a little bit different. This is out of the 4.0 manual. If you're using a chart, you have to use a chart for a 4.0 Pro firmware device if you're using the 4.0 Pro firmware. The very first thing, incredibly important, instead of having 2 options for orientation, there's tons of options for orientation, and they're all super important. So if we take a look at that, I have mine orange sticker top, and I have the wires to the back. So that's wires to the tail boom. If you take a look right here, that is what solid red is. Flat, sticker on top, socket ports to the tail boom. If I were to have picked one of the other options with it actually set up like that, when I hit AttitudeControl, this thing would go nuts. So you've got to be really, really careful that you've got this configured correctly. Again, brand new option, first thing. All these other options in here I recognized. We've got servo frequencies, we've got centering positions, we've got endpoints, we've got swash type. You know, we have to program that same 6 degrees of cyclic. to teach the system the geometry of the aircraft. We set the endpoints again, all of that. Notably, at the bottom, pyro compensation is gone. I'm assuming that has something to do with the new hardware, the new software. I don't know. I'm sure that feature doesn't go away. It's probably just inherent to the design. So again, that's all in the setup menu. We also have the parameter menu. The parameter menu is where you would enable attitude control. Do not enable attitude control until you have everything else done. That is the very last thing you do. Don't enable attitude control until the end. In fact, don't plug your servos in until you get the top section. So if you update your firmware, do the reset, do the receiver setup, then run through the first several menu options here to get all the frequencies done, you'll be much, much better off. Then plug all your servos in. Then go through and set all the endpoints. Program the aircraft. Get it working. Fly the aircraft. That's next. Make sure it flies. Tune it. Get all the basic things going. Again, attitude control remains off at this point. After you've got everything sorted out and you're flying and you're working, then you want to examine your radio. Of course, there was programming involved in getting that up. The purpose of this video is just really to go through attitude control because it's new. So the first thing you've got to consider is how you're going to activate attitude control. So I've got a standard receiver in here. There's only 5 channels that can connect. So what I had to contend with was the fact that I didn't have a dedicated channel to feed the attitude control. So if you set the standard receiver option in the receiver menu, it will configure the gain channel to be positive for heading lock gyro mode. There is no rate mode anymore, and negative attitude control gain, all on the gyro channel. So what that means is your gyro switch in this particular situation will become, when we enable it, which we haven't done so yet, your attitude control selection. So if you come over to your radio, let's make sure we're focused, and if we were to take a look at what we got here, I typically use this channel right here for my gyro selection. I mean, that seems to be a pretty traditional switch for gyro. Well, if you're flying, again, normally you'd have both hands on here. I've only got one because I'm holding the camera here. If you're flying and all of a sudden you need to hit the panic button, you want a switch that's over here. And I like my right thumb to be in control. I don't want to have to reach across the radio to go over here. So I've got 2 switches up here. This guy right here, switch F, I don't typically use. So what I did is I moved my gyro control over to here. Now I could just as easily have done this in case you use this for DR or Expo or something, right? But you got to pick one of these 2. There's another guy over here. Could have used this one too. So, I like these because they're 3-position switches. It would allow you to have 2 gyro settings and 1 attitude control setting. You can only do 1 attitude control setting, not 2. But you can do as many gyro settings as you've got switches, or you've got positions in your switch. If you had a 4-position switch, you could do 3 and 1 if you wanted. I also thought to myself, if I have my thumb here on the cyclic and I lose it and I want to turn the attitude control on to get the aircraft stable as quick as possible, my thumb is going to be moving in this direction. So what I decided to do is to keep this switch centered. This is my normal flying setting right here. And then up, which goes position 0, 1, and 2. Up is when I initiate attitude control recovery. So that's where it sits normally. Fly, 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 panic, and that's it. And the aircraft would return to horizontal, assuming that I had everything programmed. And again, keep in mind, I still haven't turned it on yet. I'm getting the radio set up first. So the next thing we want to do is we want to take a look at the gyro settings in here, and we're going to get that all taken care of first. Oops, I hit pitch by accident. It's hard to control the camera. So here we go. I've got only 1 setting right now because, again, I'm still getting this thing dialed in a little bit. The idea is it doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to fly well. I moved my gyro switch to switch F over here. That's the first thing I did, and I made sure it worked. Here I am, it's working. Park it in the center. I then I moved the normal flying gyro value percentage to the center position. I also put that same value on position 2 because, again, I'm not using that at the moment. I'm just experimenting with one value. I think this is a good value for this aircraft, and it will probably stick. So now, position 0, that's the up position, the away position, the most convenient way to hit it with my thumb in a panic situation. That's where I set a negative percentage. So again, positive values, negative values. Very similar to the gyro, the more negative the value is, the harder the aircraft will return to horizontal. So if you had a value in here, if I had a value here of -10 and I was tipped and hit the switch, it would just lazily roll back. But it's going to be losing altitude during that. If you're really low, you don't have time to waste. You also can't have it snap so hard that it's going to cause damage. Now, I started out right about here, about 40%. So after experimenting at 40%, I raised the value up slowly and slowly until I got to 82%. At 82%, this thing will be upside down and literally roll like that. I mean, it literally will be about that quick, and that's about what I wanted. Now, I didn't know that until I started to tune it. But to begin with, turn this value somewhere around half. Try 40, 45%, a little less than 50. That's a good starting spot for most aircraft. Again, don't get into a recovery necessary situation. This is all going to be testing. So a value of about 40. Now that we've got the switch programmed, the entire aircraft set up and flying, everything is working, now we can turn AttitudeControl on. So you would go either using the Studio X software or the button on the top, and you'd get into the parameter menu. To use the button on the top, you would push and hold briefly and let off, versus the setup menu, you push and hold for a while and let off. You've got a quickly flashing LED here, by the way, versus a solid LED. So you're looking for the quickly flashing LED. So in here, all these settings should have been set during your setup for your aircraft to begin with. However, you would have left AttitudeControl deactivated. Now, I use Bailout Rescue Mode. Bailout Rescue Mode requires the pilot to continue to control the collective. You still have to give the aircraft positive, thrust towards the ground. So if I have a situation where I'm inverted and I hit the button, it will snap back as quick as possible. But if I am not in positive thrust, it will start to fall. Now, I actually think that that's an advantage. I wanted to be able to control how quickly this thing would climb. So what I have to do is I have to teach myself. I need to hit the panic button and increase positive thrust. So that's my exercise when I get into a panic situation. I have to do both things. Now, if I fail to do that, I'll crash. This isn't a substitute for skill, right? This is just an aid. So, so that's the guy that I wanted. This one here, bailout rescue with pitch. This guy automatically causes the system to climb. So if you were to set that, which again you do this with the, with the tail stick, like you would any other of these settings, you go from deactivated to, purple to, or flashing purple to purple. If you were to pick this one, this guy will automatically cause the aircraft to roll over so that the blades are towards the sky. So it would be standard flight, not inverted, and it will apply positive pitch and it will start to climb. If you leave it like that forever, it would literally climb until the battery ran out. So I didn't really like that. I wanted to be able to control how quickly it climbed and stop it. Now, there's also various 3D modes that do the same kind of thing. The difference between the 3D modes and these modes, these guys will roll to the quickest, the quickest way of getting the blade to be horizontal, right? And that includes inverted. So if you pick one of these guys and you're inverted and you hit the button, it will stay inverted. It'll just keep the blades nice and even. Again, whether it's inverted and you control the pitch, which means you have to put negative pitch in if you're inverted, or whether it will automatically only enable the aircraft to move away from the earth. This will not allow you to, well, I'm not going to say it won't allow you to, but it will attempt to prevent you from, you know, burying it into the ground because you gave it the pitch in the wrong direction. So that's kind of what those do. Flight trainer mode kind of flies like a 200 SRX. Haven't done anything with that. Don't intend to. So that's the whole setup. I know it's been 20 minutes, but if I would have had this video, I wouldn't have struggled so much. Definitely don't turn this on until you have everything set up. Because again, by the way, if you do turn it on and you don't have everything set up, depending upon the orientation of the flybarless unit, it could think it's upside down and it could immediately start to try to roll it over. It would move all your servos and burn your servos up really, really quickly. So please don't turn that on until the aircraft is flying and programmed and running. Then you're good to go. Hope this helps. Thank you guys. Have a good night.